Well, hello, and as we open up this teaching portion of our worship service today, I want us to look over our homework from last week, the items that you were supposed to do, and to see how many of you did them. And so my first question, the homework that was probably last issued, was for you to walk outside, maybe take your shoes off, feel the grass on your feet, and just breathe in and out and to experience what God experiences in creation. Not to analyze the objects, not to analyze creation as to what does it prove or not prove, but to look at creation and say, God loves you. What does He love about you? So as we open up this lesson, I want to ask, did you do your homework? I'm asking for you at least one time in the week to have done that, but did you do it any other time? Did you do it maybe every day? I know I ran into one lady who came up here and she said, I'm going to walk the trail. And so she walked the trail. That was Laura. If you saw any of her videos on Facebook, I know that some of you in other places have been out at softball fields. You've been traveling around and you say, you know what I've done is have stopped at the softball field and experienced this. So I know that you can do this anywhere you go. My question is did you experience it? Did you make the time to do that this week? And so I would then ask you to ponder and to think, what about God did you see in creation? What about God did you see in those moments? And that's just for you personally to think over, to meditate on as you think about your homework from last week. And as we come to this week, I want to give you some new homework, some other things that you can do as we open up into this section of the spiritual disciplines. Today we're going to be looking at practices that let the light in, practices that open us up to allow God to shine within us. And this idea of opening up is a struggle, I believe, for us because we struggle in the idea of opening ourselves up. Becoming vulnerable with somebody is very difficult for us. I even know married couples who've been married for years. I mean, this is not newlyweds. We're talking couples who've been married for years, who they each live in their own isolated case of marriage. They're married. They might do things that married couples do. You know, they go to dinner together. They have children. They've done the married life. But they've never really been vulnerable with each other. They've never opened up to each other. They've never allowed someone else into their heart to challenge them, to change them, and to mold them. The problem that we have with vulnerability is that in order for me to be vulnerable to you, I have to open myself up to being hurt by you, to being challenged by you. And that's difficult for us. Opening ourselves up to being hurt is something that we don't do well in our lives. But it's in the times that we are vulnerable that we can most experience love. It's when we've opened ourselves up and when we've put ourselves out and we've said, look, I'm entrusting you to be able to hurt me or to love me, but I'm entrusting that to you. Those are the moments when we experience true and lasting relationship, true and lasting love. And as I think about our struggle to open up with people, I also know that I struggle to open up with God. If I can't open up to someone who I can see, that I can experience, that they can even open up to me, then how can I ever expect that I could open up to God? For those of you who say that you have no trouble opening up to God, I want to ask you a question. The last time you prayed for forgiveness, the last time you said, Lord, forgive me for I've sinned, I want to ask, did you mention the sins out loud? Did you mention them by name? Did you in any way internalize or list the things that you've done that have displeased God? And I ask that because most of the time our prayers for forgiveness consist of, God, forgive me for I've sinned. And we acknowledge that we're sinful humans. We acknowledge that there is a lot wrong in our lives that is in need of a Savior. But we don't acknowledge what those things are. To be able to give those to God and to say, God, I've struggled with this and it affected this person and I know it affected you. To do those things is a challenge. When we have to become that honest with God, when we become that vulnerable, that open to God. And I would venture to say that in this time of our shutdown, in this time of our reopening, that we have, and even before, maybe something that we've learned in this time of a stop, is that we've created our lives to be so busy that with stuff, with things, and maybe those are even busy with good things, that we do not make the time to be vulnerable with God. Today's challenges, the spiritual disciplines that we're going to spend time with today, are going to focus on slowing down our life, stopping our lives for a moment, and letting the light of God shine into our lives. So as we embark upon this journey today, I want that to be our prayer. I want that to be our lesson, that we will spend time opening our hearts, mind, soul. And as I said at the very beginning, the study of spiritual disciplines is about stopping the soul. It's about slowing even the insides down. And as we think about that, I want us to embark upon today's journey through the Bible to look at ways that we can allow God to shine within us. The first spiritual discipline for us to practice today comes from the idea of, the title is Practicing the Presence. And I'll actually mention a book here in a little bit that this is mentioned in, but Practicing the Presence. And this is the idea of the presence of God, and that you are continually walking in His presence. So I want you to, if you need to close your eyes, but I want you to imagine God as a person. Your best friend, it could be whoever, you could picture whoever you want to picture, but that individual will then be God, and that's a figment. So it's kind of like, as a kid you'd have an imaginary friend. Well, God's going to be your imaginary friend for a minute, and you're going to picture Him. You're going to picture, if you want to put it as a her, I don't care, but you're going to picture Him sitting on the couch or on the love seat or in the recliner in the living room with you right now. Or if you're in the auditorium, you're going to picture Him sitting on a pew beside you. This is the same figure, the same being that you've created in your mind is now going to be sitting in the passenger seat with you when you drive around town. It's the same that's going to be walking with you to the doctor's office. It's the same that's going to be going with you. It's going to be sitting in the back seat of the car on the date. It's the same being that's going to be with you while you are on the 16th hole at the golf course and you just made the hole in one. When you practice the presence of God, or practicing the presence, you are practicing the reality that He is with you every step of life, every step of the way. We often limit God's presence in times of life. We seem to limit His presence to when things are poor, when things are bad. The psalmist gives us a great example, not that he was limiting, but it's a verse that we think of when we think of God's continual presence. This is Psalm 46 and verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. We have this verse probably in our mind somewhere, and we will say, well, that God is always there, and when times are difficult are the times that I'll call on Him. Those are the moments when I feel I most need Him. And that's fine, that's well and good. But we then limit God to only the times of life when things seem to be poor, when we need a God to make things better. And practicing the presence goes beyond that. Practicing the presence is realizing God is with us even in the good times of life, that He is with us when we've made the hole in one, when we've done some amazing things, when the doctor gives the all clear. He has been there all along. And so when we experience pain, when we experience displeasure, when we experience hurt, loss, and death, I know God's there. But our inability to ascribe Him the positive times gives us this problem of, well, why did God allow bad things to happen? Why did this occur? And we attribute God to the negative times without attributing to Him the positive times. The text that I want to use for us in thinking about the positive times of God comes from Zephaniah 3, verse 17. The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing. So here in Zephaniah, he is talking about God, one, being with people during difficult times. So we're not going to dispute that. But God is the God who's there, who is singing over you with times of joy, who is encouraging you in every other time when you need encouragement. That God's continual presence is with you. What would life be like for you if you knew that God was with you all the time? If every waking moment you imagined God as the being right beside you, that when you got up to go get a glass of sweet tea, he jumped up too. And when you went, when you were flipping through the TV and you came across, I know it's not football season, and we're hoping football season happens, but you come across the game and you're gonna take your team and God's gonna take the Broncos. You know, what happens when we so imagine and so picture God as being ever present, that he takes on a personality, that he takes on a being who's a dear friend, someone who we've opened up to, who we've become vulnerable with. There's a French monk who lived in the 1600s. His name was Brother Lawrence, I believe was his name. And he wrote a book called Practicing the it's the Practice of the Presence of God, I believe is the title of the book. And in there, I'm going to recap a portion of the book for you for lack of quoting. He basically says that he had learned to so walk in the presence of God that God became funny, that God would have jokes, that God would talk about things to him. And in that practicing of the presence, he actually had to withhold himself from laughing out loud because things would happen and he knew it was God, that God was a part of that. And he would want to laugh, and he said, I know that I can't laugh out loud because people are going to think I'm crazy. And to some degree, as I share this with you, I know Brother Lawrence might have been slightly crazy. But my challenge for you, the challenge that I want us to embark on in this next week, if you want to practice the presence of God, I want you to step into the crazy with God. I want you to walk into a moment where you say, God is going to be so with me that he becomes another person. The second spiritual discipline that I want us to talk about is the idea of slowing. Really, it's slowing our lives down so that we can see God in the slowness. So that even when we're driving 70 miles an hour, we sometimes miss things. But when we slow down, it gives us the opportunity to see the things that are really already there, but in the hurriedness of life, we just haven't caught. And so as we talk about slowness, about slowing us down, I want us to think about that as a spiritual discipline. And particularly as society's opening back up, as things are beginning to revamp a little bit, I want to encourage you to slow down. And you're saying, Josh, I've gone through 3 months of slow. I'm ready for fast again. And that's fine. But let us not get back into the trap of going fast. Let's make sure that even as we do begin to get back into the routines of life, that we maintain a sense of slowness to us. When the shutdown first occurred and everything was closing up, it was a little chaotic. And I know that for you and as well for me, the hurriedness of life didn't disappear. It just changed. Instead of being hurried to go to place A, B, C, and D, it was hurried to stay home. But all the craziness of life was then just confined inside the four walls of my home. All of the things, all of the hurriedness that I've spent time developing in my life were now just confined to my home address. And so the hurriedness, I never really slowed down. I'll tell you where I felt this most often was in Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings during this time period have been a true blessing to me. I know for some of you, it has been a blessing. I know for some of you, the isolation and the loneliness has been just just a very unbearable pain. And for you, I am sorry. I hate that has happened. But I'll share with you, before the shutdown occurred, a Sunday morning was a frenzy to get out the door. It was get dressed, get Elliot dressed, get Ash's makeup on, and I mean, everything's flying through the air as we're trying to run out the door and to get to the church building on time. And during this shutdown, we've woken up, at least had a presentable shirt on for Bible class, have had breakfast together on a Sunday morning, sat at the table and would join Bible class on the computer. And then as class ended, would mosey to the living room where we would sit in the recliner on the love seat. We had our communion supplies there. And we would worship together as a family in this slow, relaxed state. I mentioned the hurriedness that I get into. It's typically when it comes to getting out the door. I like to be 15 minutes early to places. And if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time in my world. And I can tell you now that I said this to my tragedy. I'll tell Elliot, come on, we've got to go. Come on, buddy, we've got to go. Come on, let's get out the door. Let's get in the car. And as a 2.5-year-old, he just doesn't move as fast as I do. And he'll mosey out the door. He'll mosey up into the car, but you can't put him in the car seat. He's just too independent. He wants to do it himself. And I'm thinking, we're going to be late. You've got to hurry. And at times I want to just pick him up and put him in the car seat and get him buckled. And those are the times that normally he screams, because he wants to do it himself. He wants to buckle his seatbelt. He wants the accomplishment of doing something on his own. And as I have slowed down to see that, I wonder if that's what God sees. You see, in the hurriedness of looking at Elliot, trying to get in the car, and in the slowness that I've been trying to practice, I see that God looks at me probably the way that I look at Elliot. Except God's very different. Instead of being frustrated with my slowness and my desire to want to do it myself, God is patient. And he says, I know you're going to need me. I'll wait. I'll watch as you crawl into the car. I'll watch as you get into your car seat. I'll watch. But I know that when it comes to buckling in, I'll be there for that, because you really need my help. And I know that in my slowness, I've seen that God is patient with me, that God is slow with me. Mark chapter 6, verse 31. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. This text is coming just as the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000. And so Jesus is pulling his disciples away from ministry because he says, you need some time to rest. You need to slow down. You've been so busy with stuff, with doing good stuff, that you need to pull away. And what I find interesting is, as they're trying to pull away from the call to serve, there's 5,000 men that show up, not including women and children, who are going to want food and who are going to want a lesson, and Jesus is going to provide for them. And so even when they're trying to find rest, there's this moment where ministry calls them back. But that never stopped Jesus from finding time to slow life down and to spend it with the people who truly matter. Do we ever do ministry that way? You know, maybe in the past where we've created ministry functions, church functions, all good functions, but we've created these ideas of ministry for the sake of being busy. And maybe in the shutdown, we've learned a small part about slowing down. Psalm chapter 46, verse 10. The psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. The first part of that phrase is to be still. Now I'm not encouraging you. This spiritual discipline is not about stopping, but to be still. to slow down. And in that he says, know that I am God. Know that I am the one who really provides. That I'm the one who's patient and who's waiting to help. That I'm the one who is there for you. Be still and know that I am God. The last spiritual discipline that I want us to talk about today is unplugging. And you've probably heard me say this before, not realizing that it's necessarily a spiritual discipline, but it's a spiritual discipline that's going to apply for us today, and would be one that if you don't do the other two, that may be fine. I think the other two are far easier than this one to practice, but I would hope that we could all practice the idea of unplugging as well. Ashley and I did the first year of Grace Marriage last year. And in our first or second session of Grace Marriage, there was a couple that were in attendance who began to talk about their daughter. And they said their daughter had gone to rehab for her cell phone, which honestly I did not know they made rehab for cell phone usage. But it was such a problem for her that they enrolled her into a rehab to break the connection between her cell phone and her. And as I think about this idea of unplugging, I'm going to use the cell phone a lot, but I want us to not limit ourselves just to cell phones. When we begin to talk about unplugging, if you have cable TV, I want you to think about unplugging cable. You don't have to go unplug it, but we're going to separate from cable TV. We're going to separate from whatever digital means possible for the goal of connecting with a person. And so when we say unplug, I'm not saying about unplugging just for unplugging's sake. This is about unplugging from a device, from something technologically advanced, I guess, to then connect with a person, to be with a person in a way that you can't do when you're holding a telephone up. And so this challenge, this spiritual discipline, is in a way taking the phone off the hook of life. So as we think about how we can practice that, I want us to look at a verse really quickly before we go into some applications for it. But Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 22. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrows, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. It seems that this device, which as incredible as it is, has become much like the preacher would say in Ecclesiastes. It allows us to go home at night, but the cares of the world travel with us. The cares of work, the cares of society, the cares that we see all around us then come home to us. And then as we're laying in bed, what are most couples doing? Most couples are strolling on Facebook. They're scrolling on the news. They're scrolling on all of the things that this device can distract us with. And so even then, as the Ecclesiastes preacher says, my heart doesn't stop. My mind doesn't stop. I don't find true rest because I'm finding excitement and joy and entertainment somewhere else. My challenge for you in this spiritual discipline is to separate yourselves from technology. And like I said earlier, that may be your cell phone. That may also be cable. That may be the television. Maybe for a few days or for at least a day, you say, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to take Facebook off of my phone. I'm going to take Instagram off of my phone. I'm going to take these games off of my phone. I'm going to turn my TV off. And instead, I'm going to spend that time connecting with a person. Connect with my parents, my grandparents, my children, my grandchildren. I'm going to connect with God. I'm going to spend that time spending it with Him. I've shared this before, and I'll share it every chance I get. Ashley and I, after that Grace Marriage session, we we bought a basket that our phones go into at the house. Matter of fact, I lost my wallet the other day because Elliot grabbed it and hid it from me, but everything that is in my pockets goes into that basket at the end of a day. And it's designed to separate me from the phone. Something that I was talking with Steve Dadisman the other day about the cell phone, and his advice, and I'll share it with you, so I'm giving him credit, was don't even plug the phone in your bedroom. Plug it in somewhere else, so it's not even a temptation to you while you lay in bed. Remove the phone from your environment, and then it's not even the struggle to reach over and grab it. I think there's a lot of ways that we can practice the discipline of unplugging. But most importantly, in the unplugging exercise, it's about unplugging to connect with people. So the next meal that you share as a family, don't allow cell phones at the table. The next time you lay in bed, don't put the cell phone there. And actually talk with your spouse. Converse with them. Converse with God. Yet again, the spiritual disciplines are all designed for us to slow the soul to experience God. And the ones that I want us to experience today, the ones through this week, the challenges for this week, are about opening ourselves up to God. And if we open ourselves up to God to see what great things He can do in our lives, I know that as we encounter the spiritual disciplines, we will be truly blessed.
What's up, guys? I finally got a chance to pray. I'm actually downtown, I'd say about 100 yards 50 yards from where all the protesting's been going on, and tonight's been peaceful so far. Hopefully it stays that way. Josh talked about unplugging today, and I think we forget how important that is, myself included, to unplug and disconnect from the world. Super important, and it's something that we need to make a conscious effort to do every day, because if we don't, it's so easy to lose sight of God and where He is. Anyway, so if you could pray with me, it'd be great. God, thank you for this day you've given us. I ask that you be with our city, be with our country, and be with us as individuals, that you can work in our hearts and in our lives to help glorify you and to help spread your light to the world around us, to those who need us. Most of all today, God, I ask that you help us unplug from the chaos of the world and unplug from the stress of work and everything. And I ask that you help us to focus back on you and keep you into perspective, and to keep you on the throne that you hold. We love you, God, and we thank you. And in your Son's name we pray, amen.